Welcome to the Earthworks Podcast, where our team will share the jargon of carbon from many of our turf friends from the past 30 years.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Earthworks Podcast. Glad to see you all here this week. I'm excited to have Mr. Dave Wilber back again. Joel took him last time. He tagged out, gave him to me this time. So we're pumped. We're going to talk some renovation and construction today, and a little bit of water, and maybe I've got a little surprise at the end, kind of my version of Dave Wilber's version of the lightning round that I've been doing.
Oh no, dude.
It'll be great.
Yeah.
So welcome, Dave. Thanks for joining me.
Kevin. How are you, man?
Great. I'm excited.
Good to see you.
I took a call from Dave this morning, and we were kind of talking about prep on this, and I think it'll be a fun hour. So
absolutely.
So what I want to cover today is kind of, you've got a laundry list, a very lengthy career in construction renovation.
No, see all the gray hair.
Yeah. But what I really wanted to focus on, because my hope is that we never get back to the 90s and the insanity of construction for no other reason than to sell development lots.
Well, let's hope we're never going to do that.
Yeah. So really my focus, I'd love to talk more about renovation and kind of what you've seen over the years, what, pitfalls to avoid, the non-negotiables when we're planning a renovation project, or whether it's in-house or contracted, some of those things that you've run across. So I wanted to first start and kind of lay the groundwork, and without, because you could easily eat up the hour with this, but where have you worked?
Oh God!
Here's your resume in 2 minutes or less.
Well, my elevator speech is actually, and I give this more to non-golf people than I give to turfgrass people, but what I say is that I've been an agronomic advisor and consultant in the turfgrass world, primarily golf. I've been involved with golf since I was about 15. I have played golf on every continent. I've built golf on 6 continents, and I've worked turfgrass in some fashion or another as an advisor, as a consultant in about 80 countries, and I was 7 years a golf course superintendent.
So wouldn't you say, Mr. Wilber, then that may qualify you to answer some of these questions?
Well, it qualifies me to I don't know. There's a famous saying that, if you do the same thing over and over again, you better get pretty good at it.
Right.
That kind of thing.
Right.
But I've had the luxury and actually the privilege of, getting to think about, and narrow my focus on several areas to be a resource for golf course superintendents, builders, owners, architects, and all those sorts of things for a very long time.
Sure.
And when I was younger, I just wanted to be the smartest guy in the room. That was my thing, right? Just be smarter than everybody. But I kind of gave that up, and I wanted to be more curious than everybody. And especially as I started to bump into situations that I never had seen before, or in places I'd never been, it's like, well, I just need to learn how to figure things out.
And it's funny how the more you're in it, the more of those situations arise too, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think at first, when I first gave up being a golf course superintendent and hung my shingle, I was afraid to say, I don't know.
Right. When that was the time that you should have been much more readily saying that.
And then I learned later that those are actually the 3 most powerful words in agronomy.
Sure.
In a way, is I don't know. And then the next word should be, but I'll find out.
Right. If I can.
And I'm constantly coaching now that I work a lot more with the kind of the soul surfing end of turf headism, if you will, where we talk philosophy a lot and stuff.
Right.
I'm always saying to people, don't be afraid to say, I don't know the answer to that right now, but I'll figure it out.
Right.
It's okay to not have the answer for everything.
You're right. They're pretty powerful words for sure to kind of let on your guard for a minute.
It took me a while to grasp that, but it's good advice that I give younger supers. It's like, hey, don't let them put you on the spot. I wrote a blog post about that once that I guess impacted a lot of people, where they were like, "It's really cool that you gave me permission." Not that I give anyone permission, but to say to a member, that you've been in this spot, Kevin. The member, the golfer or whatever comes up and they want an answer about something.
Right.
You got
We're not leaving.
You got 100 things going on.
Yeah.
And the hardest thing in the world to do is to say, Mr. Haverkamp, I I got a lot going on today, and can you and I get together in an hour, 2 hours after you're around or whatever, and just give yourself that little bit of space to go think before you say something stupid.
Right. The whole 2 ears, one mouth thing, right?
Hey, some people can do it. We have some friends. We know those guys that can just get it. They get everything off their hip really easily, and they can shoot from it. And it's, I have that gift of gab too, but I started to realize that the answers I was giving sometimes were not as complete as they could be or they should be.
Or you don't address the answer in a layman's terms where
Right.
it goes right over their head.
Yeah, and I guess that's the other thing that goes hand in hand with that, is, hey, you don't have to give somebody your whole turfgrass education in that 5, 10
Right.
to 14 minutes, whatever it is.
Because one of two things happens: either nothing positive comes out of that, either they think that you're BSing them,
right.
or you're trying not to answer and just burying them in technical mumbo jumbo. So I've found that the simple answer, or I don't know, definitely is a lot of times the best.
I had a situation when I was a young my first year as a superintendent. One of the assistant pros assaulted me one day because he didn't think a pin position that I put out was
legal.
He didn't use the word legal. He knew better than that, but he was like, why would you do that? Why don't you just get the monkeys and the, and the tunnels, and just, if we're going to play miniature golf here,
right? Where's the clown?
Everybody's 7-putting that green. Why don't you just do it right? Get the monkeys and stuff. And I was like, and I started to give him this, well, agronomically, we got to move the pin and everything. And he just looked at me and says, I don't give a fuck about that.
Yeah.
I just, we had people 7-putting that green all day yesterday in the afternoon when it got dry.
Right.
He was right. I was wrong.
No.
He
probably never heard that though, did he?
Well, he just thought it was dumb that I went to, what did he call it? Turfgrass speak. Don't give me the turfgrass speak. Just come on, this is golf. It's a game. You still got to play the game.
Yep.
So
yeah. He was right. All right. So 80 countries. What was the most interesting site or project that you were ever a part of?
Oh boy. Interesting how, Kevin? Like what?
From an agronomic or construction standpoint.
I think one of the ones that stands out to me the most, I think construction wise, Kingsbarns in Scotland was for many reasons kind of crazy. It was a combination
environmental hurdles, right?
Yeah, big environmental hurdles. They found a Bronze Age warrior out there during the excavation of the thing. The Mark Parsonen, the owner, was a great man, but no picnic to work around.
Right.
I was working on a team, and that team consisted of me and Walter Woods and Dr. Paul Miller from Elmwood College. We were the agronomy team, and Walter, arguably the most famous greenkeeper in the world at that time.
Sure.
Or ever. And who am I? I'm some guy from Sacramento, yeah.
Right.
So yeah, I was, the American in Scotland, trying not to do it wrong, knowing what I knew. That piece of ground was, they had moved all the good soils off of one part of it so that they could use it for cropping. And they had drained it with a whole bunch of big old clay drain tiles and stuff. And, we essentially had to take the birthday cake and turn it upside down. We had to get the sand that they had put on the bottom back to the top and deal with all that. And some of those drain tiles, Kevin, like when we cut into them, during initial dirt moving, they literally would just explode with so much water pressure, from the slope,
Sure.
right? And they were pulling them, and they'd cut into them, and they would just, there'd be
So they
water.
put the heavier soils on top versus moving it?
Yeah, because that's what they could grow stuff in.
Sure. Yeah, makes sense.
And
Interesting.
then they put big old clay tiles through all that. Very common in the UK, I'm told.
Yep. Yep.
But I think from a challenging in every aspect thing, I don't know that I don't think Kingsbarns has an equal for me. Although Pacific Dunes was a challenge to you, but by then I had done Kingsbarns and I knew a hell of a lot more than I did then.
Yeah.
And we were in America, and we had, David Kidd and his guys had built Bandon Dunes, so there was already some infrastructure. I mean, when we started Kingsbarns, we had nothing out there. There was nothing.
Right.
It was a farmhouse and some old barns, and a Bronze Age warrior.
It just
and an old
tagging along.
It was crazy.
Huh.
From a renovation restoration standpoint, I don't know that anything was tougher than the Cow Club.
I was thinking that's what you were going to say.
Yeah,
Just
Thomas Bass is still, he and his guys, he and his whole crew, I don't know how they pulled it off. I mean, I really don't. Look at everything that had to be done there, and then 200-year storms.
Right.
During the time when we were trying to grass the thing. I can't really can't think of a tougher day in and day out gig than what those guys had to go through.
Yeah.
From a planning standpoint, we had to do something completely outside the box. The original plan was to sand cap, and we just couldn't haul enough sand in there to San Francisco. So we had to figure out how to amend the whole place and do a kind of a tillage operation and recreate.
Good. I want to talk about that. That's
Queensland sand. Yeah.
That's one of the things on my list today. So good.
And Javier, and I want to mention this. I mean, Javier Campos is there now, and he's amazing. And he was part of the team that was there with Thomas. And, I'm thinking about Grant and Josh and Thomas's assistants and all the other people that were there. Thomas assembled the dream team. Jason Na from the construction company, just it was the perfect bunch of amazing people.
Right.
But there was so many days where it was like, it might be just easier just to never come back here.
More than one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
From a pucker factor standpoint, and again, part of this was because it was one of the first ones we did, but redoing the greens at the San Francisco Club with Tom Doak and Jim Urbina for me was you take those beautiful old Tillinghast greens and basically promised everybody we would fix them, but we wouldn't change them.
Yeah, no pressure there. No pressure.
That was nuts.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was pucker. When Grant Spaeth and people like that are walking out going, hey, so you're gonna get this right. You just kind of go,
yes, sir.
Well, yeah, or I might just start that pool service business that I've been talking about.
I've been thinking about that.
Yeah, it might be good with my Toyota truck. And we used to make this joke in Arizona, Kevin. Hey, all I need is a Toyota truck and a net and a couple of boxes of chlorine, and I'm in business. Maybe that's what I should be doing, is just servicing pools. There's
always time. There's always time.
So yeah, there's been some stuff. I think a lot of things. I learned early on that what the most important thing was to find the very best people, get them there, take good care of them.
Right.
Bruce Hebner was amazing at that. We did Cape Kidnappers in New Zealand, and Bruce just, he took such good care of all of the guys that were over there working. And I mean, yeah, he's there to be the architect and stuff like that, but there's more to it than that. You create that esprit de corps kind of thing, and everybody gets along, and it's really magical, and it's amazing how much work can get done, in a short period of time.
It's a long haul, so you better get along, right?
Yeah, when you're asking people to go and be on site for 30 days at a time before they go home for a week to see their family or whatever, things better be pretty good. There not be a lot of tension and stress.
Right.
So yeah, big learning experiences every day.
Sure.
Yeah.
So as far as renovations go, and this is kind of a general question, but uh, and maybe I think I generalized it too much, but what kind of pitfalls, with your body of work and your experience, what kind of pitfalls would you tell guys that are, facing a renovation project, or they're,
Mm.
they're looking at a restoration or something like that? What are the big ones that, like the can't misses that you really want to make sure that you've checked the box on?
Well, I think the first thing that comes to mind, and maybe this list is in no particular order, but the first thing that just popped into my head is, especially in renovation restoration, and I'll use those two words interchangeably because
Yep.
that's what we're doing a lot of.
Right.
Um, Whatever anybody else did before on another site in another place doesn't matter.
True. That's a great point.
It really doesn't. And so many times I had to talk people out of making mistakes because they would say, well, wherever we were working last, this is what we did.
Right.
And it's like, no, we have to be original in our thinking for this original site that has its original issues. And then the next thing I think with that is like, and I used to do this. I realized that I was doing it. I didn't mindfully, but I would sit when I first got contacted about one of those things and just make the list of everything that could possibly go wrong. Not to be negative, but like, where are the pitfalls here?
Sure.
And it's like, well, and then I would kind of work backwards from opening day. So let's say we're gonna renovate, Coconut Creek Country Club, right? And the first thing I want to know is, well, when do you guys want this done?
Right.
And then we go backwards,
That's a good point.
and try to figure out, okay, can this really happen?
Yeah.
Because anything can be done, Kevin, and then what is the expectation? And one guy thinks, well, we'll just turn our club into the perennial construction project and we'll do 2 greens a year, and we'll be done in 9 years, kind of thing, right?
And the members will love that because they're interrupted for 9 years in a row.
Well, at some places that's okay.
Right.
Some places you can get away with that. Hey, we're closed now. We can do those couple of greens, whatever. And then there's the other place where it's like, no, we have to work with the maximum amount of people at the maximum speed that we can, and
do the whole thing.
It's all hands on deck, and then this has to get done, quickly. And the critical path is this, not this. And I think what I would always see is people's inability to look and say, well, what is my critical path if I'm going to make that end date?
Sure.
What are the key things that have to happen?
What are the big things that have to get crossed off?
So, as an example, I'm in a place where we're doing Bermuda grass. What's the last day I can plant Bermuda grass?
Sure.
What's the last day I can sod Bermuda grass? What's the last day I can, all of those things.
Yeah.
And try to say, okay, is this even possible? Can we even do this from a time, money aside? We'll get to the money part,
Right.
But time wise and expectations wise, can we meet either one of those things? And if the answer is yes, or remotely close to yes, then yeah, we can keep looking.
And it's so critical, especially if you've got a superintendent that's been around the property for a while. It's so critical to make sure that he's answering those questions and not somebody on the
absolutely.
committee, right?
Yeah, their answers to those things. And I think the hard part sometimes is for some supers, there are superintendents that are real project oriented, and I would see this when I would go on a consulting visit.
Sure.
There were supers that would put me on the cart, and they would take me from project to project to project. We did this, we did that, we built this wall, we did these cart paths, we did, and that's the tour, right? Mm-hmm. And then there were other supers who were like super, like, into the flow of things and their sections, and and I could tell right away, we're going to go 1 through 18, or we're going to go 18 backwards.
Yeah.
And the tour is very much the line of play of the golf course.
And there's probably another group that looks at conditioning first.
Yeah, there's all of that.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, who is this person? What's their skill set, around all this?
Mm-hmm.
And if they're used to doing projects and used to getting things done and used to ironing it out, and they have local contacts for contractors, concrete people, welders, plumbers, all those kinds of things, you
Sure.
can tell, right? That's what's in their Rolodex.
Yep. Yep.
And the other, but that's not everybody. And there's no fault to that. You're not a lesser superintendent because your project experience is less. Some places just don't do that stuff.
Yeah. Or it's a function of wiring too. I mean, if you're not wired that way, you're going to find people that can do that for you.
Right. So then we would say, okay, what's possible? And that, then there was always to use a kind of a gross example, the club that had always had POA greens that suddenly decides they want to have slick bent grass greens, and the golf course superintendent's never grown a blade of bent grass in his life.
Mm-hmm.
No. There's a lot of conversation around all that.
Sure.
And what they're thinking and how they're gonna pull that off.
Yeah. Or where you are. Or certain conditions on certain parts of the golf course. All that stuff needs to be
all that stuff.
So your role in that is more supportive, I would assume, right?
Has to be. Yeah. Well, I think you become the person, at least my vision is, Kevin, I've always been independent, right? So I didn't have any alphabet letters, on my letterhead, right? It was Dave Wilber.
Right.
So I didn't have the power of those things in my, in my quiver. But a lot of times I found myself having to kind of say things that the golf course superintendent had been saying for years. I just had a different way to say it.
Yeah.
And potentially a more forceful way to say it. I remember we went on to one project where the trees were the whole project was trees. Really.
Right.
They had let the trees get so far out of control on this property that it was forcing them into all kinds of stuff. And then the conversation comes about trees. Well, this is one of those clubs that don't want to talk about trees.
Mm-hmm.
We don't do that here. We don't talk about trees. We don't do tree work. We don't talk about trees. And it's like, well, then you guys are setting yourselves up to fail before we ever start. Yeah. Architect can come in and tell you anything that they want to do, but if we have 60% sun on 80% of your greens, or 60% shade on 80% of your greens, that we don't get some sun on them.
Right.
What are we doing here? And I had to be that person who would be willing to say that to whoever the powers that be would be, and take the arrows and be able to communicate well enough to write the the paragraphs, that would do that.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Well, it's the old adage that I've used multiple times in my career is that, an expert is one who travels greater than 50 miles. And then you can say exactly the same thing.
Oh, it is. It's so true. And I would get embarrassed sometimes because it's like, the man from out of town with his briefcase comes, says the thing that the poor superintendent's been saying for 10 years, and everybody goes, oh, Dave Wilber said it must be true.
But they've never heard even one time until you uttered those words.
And I just would apologize to the super and just go, I'm so sorry. And the smart ones would say, I understand how it works. And the other ones would be kind of butthurt and say, geez, my chopped liver,
Right.
And I would have to kind of say, listen, there's two different ways you can approach that in your head. Sure, you can be mad about it. You can say, well, we need to get this right, and whatever it takes.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah, you could still, as the superintendent, you can still direct the conversation, but utilize the expertise and the.
Yeah, nobody's trying to. I'm amazed at how many times I had to say this to somebody. Nobody's trying to take away from your throne here.
Right.
This is your place. I get that.
You're a supporting role.
Yeah. I'm not trying to make you look bad. I'm not trying to. Nobody wants to oust you. I think that a lot of that just comes with the general insecurity that we all felt in our business and feel in our business.
Sure.
That idea that nothing is permanent, even if you've been there a long time. I've seen people that you never ever would think would ever leave their job still be nervous about it every day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like
we just talked about that the other day, actually.
Yeah. It was weird, but I understood. I also understood. And
Okay, so specifics on.
specifics on restoration renovation as far as that goes.
Yeah, so and I want to kind of break it out into
Okay.
the major areas of restoration renovation, but and maybe that's the best way to kind of approach this. So I guess we'll start with greens and work our way back.
Okay.
Okay, so and we were talking before we started this about some of the sites where there were natural sand sources on the property that may or may not have met USGA spec. And we were talking about how you utilize that and the fact that, what's been there for eons is probably going to work just fine as long as we don't, intervene too much, right? So with sand selection, I don't care if you're talking about the sand dunes of the UP or Bandon Dunes, or you're talking about some remote site that maybe doesn't have a good sand source. So with selection on greens construction, if you can't find a suitable source, what do you do then?
Well, I think it's this, Kevin. I think, again, speaking to the restoration renovation world.
Right.
Right. So a lot of times we're dealing with golf courses that were built when, 40s, 50s, 60s,
Yep.
1900s or whatever. And a lot of the things that I got called to early on in that world, somebody had decided that they needed to fix a green or two. Right. And I'm not, God, please, I don't want anybody listening to this to take this wrong. Okay.
I think this is exactly where I want this to go.
Yeah. So here's a golf course that was originally built not to USGA specs.
Sure.
Their greens, right?
80-year-old golf course.
And now we go build 2 USGA greens.
Yep.
Or 3.
Yep.
Or one putting green, and because we moved the clubhouse or expanded the clubhouse or whatever. And now we have a whole different thing. And that whole different thing, nobody likes it. Right. And then if somebody does like it, then they don't like everything else, right?
Including the superintendent.
So to me, that's the definition of lose-lose.
Yes.
And so, what I would kind of do is and unfortunately this gave me a little bit of a moniker of a sand green hater.
Right.
Kind of thing. USGA green hater, California green hater. It's like, no, I just don't understand why we have a golf course that was built in the 40s that has these kind of cool push-up greens that have a few things wrong that we can definitely fix.
Mm-hmm.
There's other issues that are bigger on the golf course. Let's say they're rerouting something or again, the trees, all those sorts of things. And all we want to do is put this thing back together in a way that we have consistency.
Right. Right.
And so that can't be building, a few USGA greens. And
likewise, I said sand, but I mean, that goes for the surface too, right?
The whole place.
Yeah.
The whole place, right? I was really, really impacted one day. I was a young assistant superintendent on one of Morris and Weisskopf's first jobs together, working for Mike Kozak. And Tom Weisskopf was on site a lot on that project. He was there a lot.
Right.
And I was hand watering a green one day, during the grow-in, and he walked up and said, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm watering this green, And he said, well, don't you have sprinklers for that? I'm like, yeah, but if I turn those sprinklers on, that's going to get too wet over here and this needs more water. And he's like, well, why don't you, put in different sprinkler heads? Well, we did. We had we had full circles and but it still wasn't good enough.
Right. It never is.
Yeah. And he was confused about that. He's like, I just can't understand why well, what that conversation led to was him saying, I don't understand these rock hard greens, because you walk 2 feet off the green and you're on this kind of soft soil.
Mm-hmm.
But you're 6 feet over here. It's hard. And he was talking about tournament golf and stuff, how, the greens would get so hard. And he said you'd have these soft kind of, he called it soft clay over here,
mm-hmm.
and hard sand over there. Why would we build that way? isn't there a better way to build? Well, I was 20, so I didn't know, and it was Tom Weiskopf, and I'm
Sure.
scared out of my wits, right?
So you knew it was Tom Weiskopf.
And Mike told me, don't say anything stupid.
Easier said than done.
Don't say anything stupid,
I'm
right?
20, Mike.
Keep your mouth shut, work hard.
Yeah.
That was his thing around those guys, around Tom, around the Wadsworth people. Keep your mouth shut and work hard. And if there's anything that needs to, talk to me. So I remember talking to Mike about that later, and he just kind of went, whatever, it's what we're doing. Right. Some years later, Jim McPhillamy Sr. was at Pole Creek Golf Club in Colorado, and Jim was known as a real irrigation wizard. That's what he wanted to do after he was done being a golf course superintendent. He was consulting in that world.
Sure.
And I went to school with Mike. Jim Jr. was a couple years behind us. I mean, we were, the McPhillamies were, we're Colorado people, and Jim Sr., very smart guy,
Right.
Hardcore, chain smoking cigarettes, that kind of thing, but like cool, right? Old school superintendent. And he was talking about the very same stuff. Why would we water this different than that? And we were talking about, why not top dress around your green surrounds and get some, sand.
The whole surround.
Yeah. Why would you just top dress the surface?
Mm-hmm.
Why stop the top dresser here? Just top dress the whole area, And I was like, and from that point on, for me, it wasn't long after that I was a golf course superintendent. That's how we did it. We top dressed the entire green complex. It was a lot of work and a hell of a lot more sand, but our product was better.
Yeah.
And it was based on hearing those things, So I heard it from a very, very hardcore professional golfer, and I heard it from a very hardcore, professional superintendent, and my brain went, okay, this is something we can do. Well, you fast forward a bunch of years, and we're looking at links golf courses and all these cool little golf courses and everything. One thing I noticed is, green tee fairway. I'm sticking my soil probe in the ground, and it all looks the same.
Mm-hmm.
Save the top dressing layer.
Right.
That everybody put on the greens, because they thought they had to, just on the green, right?
So in a Georgia project where you've got heavy red clay. So what's the solution there?
Well, so like what we did was thinking about the Rawls course in at Texas Tech.
Okay.
And so Tom Doak and Jim Urbina wanted that idea that the ball wouldn't be different. And we knew we couldn't plant different grass, right? We're growing Bermuda grass. We're not going to,
Right.
But why does the ball have to be different or whatever? So we figured out a way to, we weld out for greens, and we built California style greens there with no gravel blanket. And then around the green surround was kind of capped and mixed in. And we mixed in sand with the native soil, and we figured out what that blend was going to be. And man, it's I don't know, I've been there in a while, but it was really good.
How do you, when you say you figure that out, explain that.
So part of it is knowing what you've got. This goes back to your first question. It's like, what is the thing that we got to do? Okay, I've got a renovation, I've got a restoration thing going on.
Right.
Or a construction job, even. Well, what do I have here to deal with? Do I know what the makeups are of these soils? I've got a great picture from Robinson Ranch when John Pollock was growing that thing in. And there's like this super blonde, almost white soil on a bunch of mounds. And then there's this dark soil down at the bottom, And I'm like, John, I don't think we can fertilizer water that the same.
No, you might be right.
You're right. We need to do something about that. And we did. We tested this soil, we tested that soil for physical properties and for, and that's okay. What do we got to do?
Sure. Okay, that's what I was driving at. It's a physical and a chemical aspect.
Yeah, we would, what is the sand, silt, and clay? Because a lot of times people would say, oh, I've got this heavy clay, right? But it was only heavy clay because it was all set up because it had been tromped on or whatever. And then you do a textural triangle on that thing. And, this is where FFA and the whole, does it ribbon? Does it do all that stuff?
Sure.
Would really serve me, right? We dig up some soil and we do an actual field scout on it and try to figure out what our third was.
Yep.
And get out the picture and say, okay, this is actually sandy clay loam.
Mm-hmm. We should be able to work with this.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
this isn't heavy clay. Yes, there's a clay component to it, and the clay component is overbearing. But what if we change that? What if we, instead of having sandy clay loam, what if we just got it to sandy loam? How much sand would it take, and what kind of tillage would we have to do to make that change?
Right. Right.
Yeah,
And at what depth and all that. Right.
all that. And
Yeah.
all that testing is available. You know, you got the simple sand, silt, and clay test. Then you can test what the particles are of the sand.
Mm-hmm.
You know, how is that spread? And then you can go one step further and look at what the moisture release curve is of whatever.
Sure.
How deep do I have to stack this before the pore spaces will become more air oriented and less capillary?
Mm-hmm.
You know, is it 3 meters? Is it 2 feet, 1 foot, 8 inches? And I would get really upset with people, you know, they call up, and architects, right, would call up and say, hey, we're going to sand cap this golf course. We're going to put 8 inches. And I'm like, well, how'd you figure that?
Because we've got $10 million that we can spend.
Right. We figured out that, and I'm like, well, okay, so where's that sand coming from? Did you test any sands? No, that's why we're calling you. I'm like, well, then how'd you come up with 8 inches? Well, that's just, and I went, okay, stop.
Right.
Stop. And that's where we'd stop, you know? And then we go test 3 or 4 different sands, right? Some of them that wouldn't, quote unquote, make a USGA type spec, or wouldn't be the ideal top dressing sand, but it might be something that you could really build out of.
Yeah.
And you could cap to 8 inches.
Right.
You know, but then here's this other sand that looks really pretty on the soil test, but you got to put 22 inches of it to get it to break water.
Yeah.
Well,
Interesting.
you know?
But you know, you said something when Joel had you on that bears repeating, because I think it's so all encompassing, and yet it's so simple, that all of these things that you're talking about right now involve planning, involve you know, making the right decisions to amend with the right things, whether it be, you know, chemistry, whether it be physics. But what you said was, and I'll paraphrase it, you can do a lot in a month that would take you 5 years to fix.
Oh yeah. Because
right?
you know, right. So we get called into situations to try to fix some soils, or something wasn't going right or whatever. And so, okay, you know, you get the soil test back and you sit down and you write out the plan. You know, we can put out this much of that, this much of this, you know, whatever. I'm just being general.
It's just a recipe at that point.
But when I have no grass to put it through, and I can use some tillage, even tillage light enough that I just have, you know, little tines on my Sand Pro,
right,
Infield Pro,
right,
you know, or you know, Justin's Quaker machine or whatever it might be, right? Now that that's open, well, the game just changes completely.
Yep.
So instead of putting out 10 pounds of, you know, let's say lime, you know, instead of putting out 10 pounds per thousand, you know, for 10 years.
Yeah. Let's get it to 8 inches, and we can
put out 100 pounds per thousand square feet right now, work it in, and say, that's it, we're done.
And you're done. Yeah.
We'll never have to do that again. But, you know, rock phosphate, stuff like that. I can put a phosphorus source in this soil that will be here forever. And everybody talks about minimalism and how we don't want to, you know, well, how about this?
What's more minimal than that? Right?
I could put this mineral in this ground and it's going to stay there for 4 lifetimes.
Right. Right.
You know, and we've set this up for success, and we've set it up for the turf grass to do well, and everybody's happy. Man, that's called getting 5-10 years ahead of the game. And that's what I was thinking about when I said that to Joel.
It was just, I listened to the podcast in its unedited form, and I called Joel. I said, that is $1 million phrase, right? And literally it's $1 million phrase.
But you know where that comes from, Kevin? It comes from writing recommendations. I used to work with a lot of corn ground, a lot of grapes and stuff like that, right? And you know, what would my recommendations look like? You know, 100, you know,
right.
You know, 7 tons per acre of this.
You got open ground.
10 tons per acre of that, you know, compost or whatever. Sure. And then on the golf courses, it's like, well, you know, let's use 100 pounds per acre and just keep putting it out, you know, as many times as you can afford to go across the golf course. Well, it's just painfully slow.
Yeah. You know, the analogy I've used with some clients is when we built our home 18 years ago, I talked to the electrician during construction, and I said, hey, I'd like some more lights in this eating area in the kitchen. And the guy looks at me, you know, and he was a tradesman, and he was good at what he did. But he said, oh, hell, you'll be able to cook eggs on the countertop when I get done with this place. So 10 years later, I spent 10 times as much having an electrician crawling in the attic, wiring more drop down lights into the eating area.
Right.
Whereas I could have spent, literally 10% of that having him do it when everything was wide open and just framed. And it's the same concept.
It's the very same concept.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we just, we have to baby it. I got called one time to a place that some farmers owned, and these were really good guys. They were rice farmers. And
oh boy.
yeah, and it's only turf, right? How hard could it be?
It is a small grain, but
the soils in that area and all that stuff. So they go out and put like 8 tons per acre of lime across this grass, and the place is just white.
Oh, geez.
And they're like, uh-oh, and they're yelling at each other, and I told you we couldn't do that and all that sort of stuff, and just to give a ton per acre, you can write your name on the hood of your truck,
right?
How we draw, hi, wash me, whatever. So think about 8 tons per acre,
right
on turf that's mowed at 3/16 of an inch or whatever, or half an inch fairways, right?
Nice and three-dimensional artwork at that point.
And I go out there and these guys are driving their golf carts and there's just like clouds of lime. And they're like, what do we do? And I'm like, well, what do you, and I thought it was so funny because these guys are, A+ rice farmers. And I go, what do you do is you got to till, and so we, in this particular case, we found an airway that some golf course wasn't using and had them just go out there and start running it until they couldn't run it anymore.
Just go vertical, right?
And just try to punch that stuff in and all that sort of stuff. But, the place wasn't super playable for a while, was it? Between the lime and then between, having to go out and punch the hell out of the place. And it's like, this is what you got to do. So that's what I'm saying. If we have beautiful golf and country club, we're not going to do that sort of stuff. But if we strip some sod off because we're doing a little bit of, restoration work or renovation work or whatever, you bet I want to get that soil fixed.
Yeah. But it also goes back to what you said about, starting at the end and work. What is the result that you desire? And let's, we'll back into that from there.
Yeah. So I'm stunned, Kevin. Like I'll ask people, I'll go, like they're just going to do a little sod job, and I was always really good at asking questions, and then not good at playing poker when they gave me the dumb answer.
Right.
But I kind of do the Colombo thing. Oh, okay. So you're gonna sod that? Yeah, we're gonna sod that. Yeah, how many square feet is that? It's it's about 22,000. What are you gonna do for soil amendments? We got some starter.
Little triple 16.
We got some triple 15. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I would just go and I would just look. And the people that knew me, or I would say, interesting. That's one of my words for I don't know.
Long uncomfortable pause after interesting, right?
And the one guy says to me, he says, that wasn't the right answer, was it? I said, no, it's not the right answer. I said, look, it's 22,000 square feet. Go get some organic fertilizer, get some Renovate Plus, get some stuff.
Right.
Why wouldn't you do some work with that?
Right. Because that's the time. That's when you got the time.
That's the time.
So with respect, we'll kind of get back to greens for a minute. So I was telling you about a golf course that we're working with in the South right now, and when they did their standard spec green, using peat as their organic amendment.
Oh, right.
It didn't meet spec, and so we ended up with some alternatives to that. And so from your perspective, I want to ask, because I've never asked this of anybody, how did we get to peat and why peat?
Well, we got to peat because it was inert
and easy.
We got to peat because it was easy to blend into sand because the sand guys could handle it. It was pretty widely available. And look, don't get me wrong here. I don't want to get the phone call from Mike and the guys at Dakota Peat and stuff. I mean, good peat, good humic oriented peat or whatever is valuable stuff.
For sure.
You know what I'm saying? But then there's the other side to peat, which is the sticks and the twigs and all the shit that's never going to break down.
Yeah.
But it would never clog any pore spaces, so it made stuff look good in the laboratory.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And when everybody was, we've gotten away from that a little bit, but for a long time, all anybody talked about was perk rate, Kevin.
Yeah.
What's the perk rate?
And again, it to me, it's based on the site. I mean, I walked into a project one time that had those ill-fated 2 greens that were renovated.
Yeah.
And the organic, because it was local and close, was bark dust.
Yeah.
Perked like crazy, 50,
Right.
55 inches plus.
Move water just across the duck's back.
Which I didn't need with 15 inches of precip a year. I did not need 55 inches an hour.
No,
but
absolutely not.
It met the organic spec.
Right. And it met the laboratory.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's the classic, hey, in the test tube, in the tube mounted in the lab, this is what it's supposed to do, but this is the real world where I'm growing grass and I don't have, really nice lab water. I got, my crummy water.
Right.
I've got all these, I got dust in the air. I got all these things going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
I remember early on, I got pretty curious and I was like, because I had spent a lot of time, chasing my tail as a consultant, really upsetting contractors and stuff, hey, that's only 20 inches of perk. We need 22, right? And just, oh my God, thousands of tons of mix that wouldn't be hauled to the site or had to be hauled away from the site or whatever. And I was the bad guy a lot of times with all that. And a lot of times I was like, God, 22 inches an hour. Like what can my sprinklers put down? What comes out of the sky? What are we doing? So I read up and figured out how to build a double rain percolometer. You know what I'm talking about? So we would,
sure, of course.
We had this, 6-inch piece that we would drive clear into the gravel, and then a 3-inch piece that we would drive inside of that.
Mm-hmm.
Get the whole thing wet, then drive the 3-inch piece in. And then I had a little deal to measure how quickly the water would perk, right?
Yep.
And infiltration rate is different than perk rate. How water infiltrates has got nothing to do with perk, which was the saturated conductivity in that sand. Well, we would, we'd see these really beautifully performing greens that were with that testing system, be no more than 6 inches.
Mm-hmm.
I think the quickest one that I ever did in that sort of deal was 6 inches of actual perk.
An in-place green that's actually got traffic across it.
Compacted and grassed and all that stuff, right? And we would take a little, on the 3-inch core, we would take the plug of grass out, so we just the plug.
Yep.
And I'm thinking to myself, well, what are we doing here? We got all these really fast moving waters, or we got all these fast moving sands and kind of crummy water. And I get that. I get getting water to the drain tile is a big deal, right?
Sure.
But what I don't like is inducing drought for no reason.
Yeah.
And watering for what is our real reason for watering here? It's not because the plant needs all that water. It's because we're trying to exchange air, right? It's a perky water table.
Right.
It's got to flush. Got to have the handle on the toilet. It's got to go
or move it through the P-trap, right? So to speak.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I don't know what we're doing here is right. And I understand why they're setting this up this way. And I understand it's got to test this way in the lab. And I understand there has to be specifications or what do you build to? And we don't want to see what we saw in the 50s and 60s, which was every sand on the, whatever sand was around, whether anybody liked it or not, got used. And some of it made no sense to me whatsoever. And we saw a lot of that in Asia too, or they would take a really nice sand and put all kinds of shit in it. And then it would just become concrete.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we can't do that. No. But there wasn't a lot of common sense, I think, in some situations. And I saw a lot of people get hurt, contractors, superintendents and stuff. And I thought, I don't want to be like this anymore. And I said, let's think. So part of that thinking was, well, maybe we need to look at some different organic sources.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Butler said to me one time, we were doing a golf course up by Fort Collins, Colorado. And it was after he retired, but he came out to see us because one of his old buddies, Neil Johnson, was finishing the greens, and he and Neil went way back. Butler looks at me, he says, Dave, do you know what paunch is? And I said, it's the same thing I'm thinking of. It's like it's tripe. It's the lining of the stomach, right? He goes, yeah, it's the shit that they scrape off the tripe from the ruminant stomach. And he said, well, that's what we should be using for these grains, is paunch.
Is there a plentiful supply of paunch?
No, well, that's what he was talking about. There's a slaughterhouse down the way, Montfort.
Okay. Okay. So proximity.
So he was like, yeah, you could go over there to Montfort and see if you can get some paunch, And I thought, I'm not going down this road. But I understood what he was saying. He's like, hey,
what's the SGN on that paunch? What's the size?
Yeah. And how do I explain to everybody how bad that smells? Because I know what it smells like.
Right.
I think Butler thought it was funny that I would know that just because, I grew up near cattle,
Mm-hmm.
And we're yucking it up about that. And he thought that was funny. He says, yeah, you'd have to hold your nose with that stuff. He says, can you imagine trying to get a sand supplier to mix that in? And I said, no, not really.
So you didn't use the paunch.
We didn't use the paunch, but I understood what he was saying.
Right.
Like if we're going to have the best organic thing here, there's a lot of different choices.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of different choices, and some of it needs to be mineral oriented and some of it needs to be biologically oriented. And this idea that this rather inert kind of material that never really broke down on its own, peat moss,
right,
is a good source, is not necessarily like the best thing.
Safe and predictable, right? It's not going to screw anything up, but
right. Works good in the lab, works pretty good in the field.
Yeah.
Doesn't necessarily bring us all the advantages that we could have in trying to get these greens going.
That's right.
And that was the other part of it is, we would be we'd always have our backs against the wall, Kevin, trying to get things done, right? Yeah. That 2 extra weeks that we thought we had would evaporate in a heartbeat.
Yeah, so what are you reaching for? You're reaching for synthetics that can give you tons of kick and fill in, and you got 2 inches of thatch in a couple of years, right?
Yeah, I remember I wrote a program for a guy, the 70-day grow-in program. You could get a bentgrass green from from seed to open in 70 days. And I'm writing it up and I'm thinking to myself, this is a mistake.
Right.
I mean,
right.
We can do this.
You can do it.
But this is just dumb. And we've blown all the organic out of this thing. We've cooked all the carbon out of the thing, getting all the grass out of the ground, and the greens come up and they're okay and we're open, but they're kind of weak and they get trampled. And it's like, no, we got to do better.
Yeah.
We got to do better, And so then everybody wants a formula. So it's like, well, if it's not 70 or 72 days, Dave, maybe it's 96 days. No, that's not it either. It's thinking about what we're doing amendment wise and all that. And that's where Joel and I started working on that whole, what is now Renovate Plus, and not to do a commercial for you guys, but that was born out of he and I making some visits to some places where we'd have 6 or 8 or 10 different products stacked next to a green and we're trying to do pre-plant, And Joel's like, I think I can just get all that in one bag.
It's the short and the long-term investment in the system, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'd have a bag of kelp and a bag of New Jersey green sand and a bag, and it'd be all out there. And these poor guys would be out there spreading material all day.
Right.
And
then go to the next green.
Yeah. Looking at their watch going, no, are we ever going to get this seeded? And, we've just done a lot better. And so, when you told me that story about looking at some other materials and it, and it helping, in a whole bunch of different ways, I'm like, well, yeah, welcome to the 2000s.
Sure. Yeah.
We don't need to do it like we did it in the 60s and 70s anymore.
So, all right. So let's, believe it or not, we're getting low on time already. I'm not surprised.
Just started, dude.
So quickly, let's talk in generalities, and we'll have to have you back because we just barely scratched the surface. But we talked a little bit this morning on the phone about water delivery systems. I decided to call them that rather than an irrigation install.
Okay.
So what are the biggies for you? And then I've got my my final Jeopardy on the end of this.
The biggies in water delivery or water quality?
I don't even want to touch water quality because I think it's
I was going to say, let's not go there yet. That's another hour.
Yeah, it's a conversation in itself.
Yeah. What are the biggies in water delivery in regards to construction these days? Or tell me what your question is about that.
Well, you led me this morning in the conversation about why do we water?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
How do we design with that notion in mind?
Well, again, I think in our business, we all want to, a lot of people want to choose sides. Are you a deep and infrequent guy? Or are you a light and that's not it. It's certainly not it when you're talking about a perched water table. Now, there's only one way to water a perched water table.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So water it until it flushes.
Yeah.
Period. And I cannot tell you the number of greens that we've saved or people's lives and careers that we've saved by saying, "Hey, listen, Mr. Superintendent,
get that irrigation flag, turn it on, and we'll come back in an hour."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. The greatest, most high profile situation of that was Mark Machad and I at
I remember this story. I remember this.
I can't turn these sprinklers on for more than 3 minutes. The water's not running off. And it was good. Well, good. Let's turn it on for 3 hours and go drinking.
Right.
No, he's like, "You're out of your damn mind." I mean, Dave, this is Pebble Beach. We play golf here.
We don't have 3 hours.
And so we go to the British Bulldog, and Mark is just sweating. His upper lip is just sweating. And we go back to the golf course under the lights, and we've had dinner and not too much to drink because we got to drive out there, and we drive up to this green, and the water's rolling, and there's nothing puddling. And he's like, "What? How'd that happen?" Right?
Yeah.
On a relatively, on the fifth green at Pebble, which Ed Miller had rebuilt.
Sure.
When he was there in the 90s.
Yeah.
And so we had the whole conversation about, hey, why do we water? And I asked him, I said, "Mark, why do we water?" And he's given me what he thinks is the textbook answer. The plan is 80% water, blah, 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 blah. And I went, "Is that why we water?" Because, if I figure out what the total biomass is of 5,000 square feet and then take 80% of it or whatever, that's not very much water.
That's right.
And then we start talking, and then we start talking about ET, and I'm like, "Okay, yeah, I understand evaporation, transpiration, I get all that, but that's still not very much water. What's next?" And next is water is the way to pull air through the soil, like with a straw.
Mm-hmm.
Where's my straw? I don't have my straw. You take your thing off the straw,
Sure.
right? Flush.
Yeah.
That's a perched water table. And so many times we're irrigating because we need to get air into the soil. So if we're just spritzing, and in some climates that works, it's fine.
Yeah.
It's not good for everywhere, but you and I have spent 90% of our time in the Western US or in more arid places, and the home of evaporative cooling.
Sure.
So we get that advantage of evaporative cooling if we water deep enough in those kind of soils, and you dig down, the soil is cool. And so I've just spent a lot of time working with people saying, "Hey, why are you watering? I understand the hot, dry day, but I also understand the need for gas exchange."
Mm-hmm.
And
so how does that play into design then?
How's it play in design as far as design of the system itself?
Yeah. Or maybe it doesn't. It's more operation than at that point.
Right. I think we're going to build what we're going to build.
Yeah.
But knowing what those greens are going to do, let's go back to the classical golf course that we're going to restore. And let's say that we've done our homework and we've put together that sand, silt, and clay thing that's perfect. We got the sandy, the sandy loam,
Mm-hmm.
right? That part of the textural triangle that we know that works best for that particular place.
Right.
Then the next move is to try to figure out how to water that well, and to take water quality into consideration, and to take the weather into consideration, all that sort of stuff, and say, how do we make this a playing surface? And that's the difference between somebody's home lawn and that playing surface. And when we water that correctly, when we irrigate that correctly, deliver water to it in the right amount, the right way, we're not necessarily talking about ET and all those sorts of things. And this is where I used to poo-poo the moisture meter, and then all of a sudden one day the light came on for me and went, "This is actually great."
Yep.
And it goes back to a conversation I was having with Sean Emerson once a long time ago, Kevin, where we were drying down some soil in a microwave and weighing some things out and trying to figure out what that percentage would be.
Mm-hmm.
We've
got to need your way now. Right? Yeah.
Right.
And it's completely
you against this technology. Yeah, you're really slick. You can grab the end of your soil probe and get a thought about what that moisture content is.
And Sean could literally put that in the hands of any one of his 200 employees, and they could come up with the same number.
Right.
That's the other power to it.
That is the power. And because I couldn't teach it to my people good good enough. Is that the right? I couldn't teach it well enough.
Yeah.
To that it would translate
Right.
day in and day out with all the variables and all that sort of stuff. But a number on that meter, if the meter's working correctly and all that sort of stuff,
Yep.
and that's not to say that 17% is good universally. It's that 70% is good for our place.
Exactly.
Or here.
Exactly. That is not a stimp meter reading.
No.
No.
And so I don't go down the road and put my moisture meter in at some other guy's golf course and go, oh, all your problems are is because you're not at 17%.
You're doing it wrong.
No.
Yeah.
But I could teach and I've seen people teach their people, and then when I started watching guys throw irrigation flags, like,
right.
They've got two colors of flags. This is too wet. This is too dry.
Yeah.
Based on those numbers, and they're just tossing flags here and there. And the guy's coming along and watering. And I'm like, this is what we've been after.
That's it. Yeah.
This is it.
Complete control. And you didn't turn a head on.
We didn't turn a head on.
Yeah.
We didn't suffer with 60% distribution uniformity.
Yeah.
And say that was good.
That's so good. That's so good. And I think a lot more guys get it now that they've got that tool in their hands.
Yeah.
And maybe they don't know why, but they're getting there, and they're definitely across the board. They've got things more dialed in than we've ever had it.
Listen, I'm not, my ego's not so big that I can't admit a mistake, and that was a mistake that I made.
Right.
But I also think that the first versions of those meters were not the TDR. They were not the good stuff that we see now. The first ones that people brought to me they came from the greenhouse industry.
Sure. It was something you stick in your potted plant in your window.
Yeah. And it just didn't,
the old analog 0 to 10 scale. And what is that?
Wasn't a good tool.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now we have good tools, and it's teachable, and it's reproducible. It's all of those things that a good goal should have, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So this is a perfect segue into the finale here.
Oh God. Okay.
And here's my question.
Yeah.
Where is the business headed? Where's the golf industry headed?
Well, I don't.
60 seconds or less, Dave. Go.
The turfgrass industry or the golf is?
I think the larger golf industry.
The game is not going away. Golf courses are not going away. The places that all these guys are talking about on Twitter today, Kevin, will be there after you and I are long gone.
Yep.
And I'm hopeful that places like the Cal Club and Pacific Dunes and Kings Barnes and all those things that we'd like to talk about, and newer stuff like Cape Wickham, and all that's been done, it's going to hold up.
Mm-hmm.
That 50 years from now, people are going to be playing the game in some fashion.
Yeah.
Whether or not the USGA, the RNA, and everybody can get their shit together over the golf ball is going to be a big part of that.
Right.
And I hope at some point somebody gets some stones and gets that worked out.
Right.
Our business, if those golf courses exist, our business will always exist.
Mm-hmm.
But we're never going to be able to do it like we did it back in the day, labor-wise and stuff like that.
Labor was my next question. What are we going to do?
The days of striping everything up and really polishing and buffing out a golf course North Scottsdale style, I think is just going to be less and less of a thing.
I like to call it the more dollars than cents era, right?
Yeah, right.
SCN.
As Jim Urbina would say, the talking cactus era.
Yeah, because we can.
Yeah, because I as a great example, when I first got to Lake Wildwood Club, they were walk greens mowing there, but we were, we didn't have a huge staff. We had the right staff, but in my head, I knew that if I triplex greens, we could do a lot more.
Right.
But my ego wouldn't let me do that. We bought 2 new triplex mowers that we verticut and mowed tees with.
Mm-hmm.
We verticut greens with and mowed tees with, right? I don't know, what were they? 3100 Toro 3100s at the time.
Sure. Yeah.
1990. And in my head, I knew that those Toro floating heads would be just fine for those greens, that there was plenty of room to turn. I wasn't at a place where it was, it was like the 17th at PGA West or whatever.
Right.
Why didn't I
floating green?
Why didn't I swallow my ego? Why wasn't I kinder to my whole situation, my staff, my membership, my budget, and everything, and say, hey, we can triplex greens?
Because it goes back to a lot of times we're our own worst enemies.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for me, that's a gross example or a great example or whatever of where where my ego to keep up with everybody else, hey, everybody else in town is triplex mowing or is mowing with a 22-inch Watt greens mower, so do I.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And all I got to do is buy a new fleet of them and put a better groomer on the thing and that, you know, and it was like, hey, where does that end? And I was guilty. You know, I was guilty of striping. I was guilty of doing all that sort of stuff because I wanted to look great. I wanted to be great.
Yeah.
And I couldn't get out of my own way with that stuff.
Sure.
And now, since 2007, 2008, we've had to look and we've had to say, well, how are we going to do this with half the people?
Yeah.
How are we going to do this? And labor is not going to go away. This issue of labor is not going to go away. And whether you want to argue minimum wage or any of those sorts of things, it doesn't really matter. That's always going to be the biggest factor.
Yep.
It's going to be the biggest number that we spend, and it's going to be the biggest factor. And so the success of our business comes down to me, the success of Turfgrass is us losing some ego, you know, making assistant superintendents, second assistants, irrigation people, and all that stuff more career oriented, pay them what they're worth,
mm-hmm.
you know, so that they stay, not selling them a bill of goods that everybody should be a golf course superintendent, because everybody should not be a golf course.
Right.
I'm not even sure I should have been one, you know, quite frankly. And so that's where the success of our business comes.
Yeah. And I think inevitably it's going to push technology too, don't you? I mean, it already has.
Yes. Yeah, there's no question.
Yeah. All those factors, whether, you know, like you said, it's minimum wage or just the shortage of labor or location for a lot of people, which then, of course, goes back to the other two. And I think technology plays a huge role in what we're going to see in the future.
I think you know, I mean, I was talking with Leah Brillman once, and she was talking to me about grass breeding and all that sort of stuff. And she's like, you know, there's a lot of people that, you know, you're a grass breeder. When are you going to breed grass that doesn't need fertilizer, doesn't need water, doesn't, you know, it's just like, that's never going to come. You know, agronomy is agronomy when it comes to that. Yes. You know, we're going to improve. We're going to do more. You know, I don't think we're ever going to get into a situation where we're back to planting bent grass in Florida.
Right.
You know, things like that. I think we're making wiser decisions about that and not being as, you know, as sold a bill of goods there. Although I'm seeing in other places of the world, I'm seeing marketing, you know, still be a big factor in people's agronomy decisions, and I don't get it.
Well, you know Sean Emerson well enough to know this. I'm sure you've heard him tell this story, but he's right on the money. I can give you great grass for 9 months out of the year. Tell me which 9 months you want.
Which 9 months?
Yeah.
Exactly.
And that's a great answer to a never-ending question.
Yeah. So I don't know. Like I say, I hope that one of the great things that the guys in the UK used to ask me a lot was, why do you guys do it like you do it? Where Eddie Adams asked me this when he was at the old course. He said, you know, if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, my whole staff can do my job.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I have a whole bunch of qualified people. And I said, well, Eddie, you're at the old course and stuff. He said, no, it's that way everywhere.
Right.
May not be quite at this level. But, you know, a professional greenkeeper isn't always somebody who wants to be a course manager or a golf course superintendent.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when are you guys going to embrace that a little bit? And I was like, yeah, you're kind of right. You know, I know some of these operations where if the superintendent didn't come to work tomorrow, nobody would know what to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And some of that goes back to longevity, which I think has changed. You know, if you've got second and third in charge that are there longer, that becomes much more of a reality. And that goes back to, are you taking care of them? Right.
Well, yeah, we can't sit around and say, well, you know, we're still going to only pay assistants $30,000.
Right.
You know, and we're going to keep dropping the carrot at them that they may get a superintendent's job someday.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, because now we're seeing a whole bunch of superintendent's jobs come across the thing at $45,000.
I know.
You know,
I know.
do you really want the headache for, you know, $10,000 a year?
Yeah.
You know, probably not.
Yeah.
Right. But it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense that we want these people to be professional. We want them to be educated. I mean, look at every ad for assistant superintendent comes out. Must have a degree, must have all this sort of stuff. But we're going to say, hey, we're going to pay you very little. That doesn't speak right to me.
Yeah, and we wonder why enrollment's almost non-existent in all these turf programs around the country, or they've gone away. There's very little incentive in that case.
Well, I wonder, Kevin, if guys like Jim McPhillamy Sr. were sitting around having the same discussion that we're having right now when they were talking about their kids getting in the business.
Probably.
I wonder if Jim Sr. wondered how Mike and Jim were gonna do as superintendents and where the game was gonna go. This is probably always a conversation in every business and every industry. But I think the bottom line for us is this has always been a thing where it attracts a certain personality, doesn't it?
Right.
It attracts a certain personality type. It attracts a certain person who's able to move and go with the flow quite a bit, who enjoys problem solving, who enjoys all of those things, and that's probably never going to change, right? I don't see our business becoming like let's say the robots invade,
Right.
I don't know that golf course superintendent, course manager, athletic stadium manager, racetrack manager, whatever, is going to be a very different personality type than it is what it is right now.
No. It'd be pretty hard to attach an algorithm to what superintendents do.
Yeah.
It'd be pretty tough. Maybe we can end on that. We have no solution to that, but it's definitely a changing world, and us now old guys, because apparently we're in that category.
Are we old now?
I think we are. Yeah, officially.
I'm not gonna believe that for a while.
Yeah. If I let my limited facial hair grow out, I think I'd look a lot like you right now. So.
Well, I have the COVID look.
Yeah.
Which I'm told in Colorado is a sporty thing. So
it is a sporty thing, and I'm not going to be sporty. I'm sorry. My kids are all sporty right now in that regard. But
I have a friend who's a part-time musician, and his full-time job is he does pyrotechnics for like the Broncos and stuff. He's that guy. And he and I have the same hair. We have the same lack of hair up here and the same bizarro Big Lebowski hair back here. We have the same gray beard. And he goes, about half the guys in Colorado look just like us.
And that's okay.
Okay, Scott, whatever.
You got to fit in a little bit. All right, Dave, we've run out of time, shockingly, but not shockingly.
Thanks for having us, Kevin.
Dave Wilber with Wilber Consulting. Thank you again. And
that wasn't much of a lightning round, by the way. You're going to have to do better.
No, I'll do better because you're coming back. So I'll do better. I think I got the right one with Rick Tegmeyer. I think that one was pretty good. It made him think a little bit, but we'll have you back.
Just to suck up a little bit, I love what you guys are doing. I love that you're all involved with it. I'm always been a big fan of Earthworks, and I wouldn't do this for anybody else.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. No, it's been fun. It has, and it's been a chance for us to talk with guys that have a lot to offer to the industry, and I think that's the fun of it. And as many different guys as people as we can find, I think is just makes it even more fun.
Well, and one last plug for me: follow me on Twitter at TurfGrassZealot.
You bet.
Where you can find people want to know where they can find me, where they can interact, and all that sort of stuff. That's where I'm at right now.
That's a good prompt for me, because if you want to get more of these podcasts, you definitely have to subscribe somewhere where you get your podcasts, the Earthworks podcast. So Dave, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it. And one of these days we're going to have a nice dinner again. And I don't know when that's going to be. But
do people go out anymore, Kevin? I don't know. The last time I had dinner out with any turf heads was with you last March.
That's right. And at least it was memorable. So.
What?
Yeah. All right. Thanks so much. And we will be talking again very soon.
Take care.
Appreciate it.